Okay. Good. So welcome everybody. This is week 5 and it's on Tuesday instead of Monday, and it's May 23rd. So couple of things. I've muted everybody, so if you want to jump into the conversation, by all means, just unmute yourself or send me a message to let me know that you have something to say. Fabulous week last week. We had talked a lot about stuff. We're going to recap some of that Q&A that I had done on Thursday for anybody that had missed that. And we're going to go through some difficult conversations when it comes to the workplace, because I've got lots of emails about that. We also have some what-if scenarios that we'll be going through. And then as well as that, we need to know when to quit. So when do we quit having those difficult conversations? So last week, we had talked about that some people were, their difficult conversations involved setting boundaries or resetting boundaries, or confusion around, do they have boundaries? Have boundaries been crossed? So on Thursday's Q&A, I went into a little more detail about how to set boundaries, right? Or not how to set boundaries, what types of boundaries to set. So we talked about that there was physical boundaries, there was emotional boundaries, there was spiritual boundaries, different types of boundaries in order to be able to navigate through. So really the key takeaway from that is when we had talked about that, the as-is state is, first of all, getting really clear about where we're at, but then also in the to-be state, what does that look like? And at the end of the day, we're responsible on help or teaching people on how to treat us. And so it's important, if the to-be state has got some cues, or sorry, not the to-be, the as-is state has got some cues in it that you've had this conversation over and over again, no results, no change, there's lots of emotion around hurt, around confusion, around resentment, because we talked about that on the Q&A on Thursday about, those are kind of cue emotions that somehow we feel that we've been taken advantage of, or that we've had some boundaries crossed. So in the to-be state of getting really clear on what those boundaries are, right? Is somebody challenging your values and beliefs or asking you to compromise yourself? Is somebody borrowing money and not paying back when promised? Do you have somebody that's constantly late in your life that never shows up on time? Is it that your kids are glued to their technology and never put them down to listen or have a conversation? Maybe that's it. And so when I start to feel unease, or when I start to feel resentment, I've got to ask myself, like, what is it about this particular situation or this conversation that's happening that's making me feel this way? And usually I can be guided to that somehow I've had a boundary being violated. Now, people are not mind readers. If people won't be able to guess that they've crossed a boundary without you telling them. It's also that I know a lot of us think that common sense should be more common than it is, but it's not. So, and I know, and I've shared this on the webinars before, for me being an I, sometimes I get so lost in my own emotion or what's going on over here that I become oblivious to anything in the outside world. Or I've got that listening style that it's all internal and I'm all messed up in my own noise, that I'm not even aware that I'm crossing other people's boundaries, or that I'm being disrespectful or somebody's boundaries, or that my tardiness has made somebody feel that I'm taking advantage of them or not appreciating them. So I have a responsibility of teaching people how to treat me. So I also have a responsibility of being really clear with my boundaries, and being direct about my boundaries, and standing up for myself. And then holding people accountable to what those boundaries are. And if they're not, then there's some different conversations that I might be needing to have, or evaluating some of the decisions that I need to make to move forward about, me being, okay with saying no, me being okay to state that boundary and hold people accountable. And so I might need to reevaluate what type of relationship or the allowance that I have with them. And we're going to talk a little bit about that tonight, because boundaries seem to come up lots in personal relationships or those family relationships, but they also come up a lot at work. So we're going to be talking a little bit about the allowance piece, or the change of definition of relationship. And we'll also talk about that when you just get to the point where maybe you should quit having the conversation, that nothing's going to change, and then what do you do from there? So that's kind of the recap on boundaries. The Q&A this week will be a little bit later on Thursday, so it's going to be later in the afternoon as opposed to midday, and we'll be carrying on some of the conversations that we have tonight. So we're going to be talking about the what if. That was your homework, was to bring forward the what ifs, and thank you so much for everybody that emailed and text messaged and sent messenger or put comments on Facebook. It's helpful so that I'm speaking directly to those what if scenarios. So we are going to talk about that tonight. And then once again, we're going to do the difficult conversations at work. So if you are a boss or you're a business owner, you got direct reports, you're a supervisor of some sort, we're going to talk about what did those types of difficult conversations look like, and how can you prepare yourself to be the best in those conversations. And then we're also going to talk about employee to boss, right? So that communication is a two-way street. So not only sometimes do managers have to have difficult conversations with employees, but sometimes employees have to have difficult conversations with their managers as well. So we're going to talk about that. Okay, so we're going to talk about dealing with the what ifs. Now, I would say that traditional counseling, they tell you, don't paint pictures, don't go down the rabbit's hole of trying to be able to predict everything or anticipate everything. And I would say that in some situations, especially if you're overly obsessed, so you become obsessed with so much with the what ifs that it's preventing you from taking any sort of action. I know that sometimes my what ifs are really great fears that I use to dive into sometimes to avoid the situation altogether. So that's not really the practice that I want to encourage. But sometimes going through what ifs is more of that, the thoroughness in our thought process, and really being able to reflect on the difficult conversation, getting even more clarity, and being able to anticipate the direction of the conversation. And it's kind of like and I've said this in, I think in other evenings together, but definitely in other workshops as well. If you fail to plan, you plan to fail. And so in my difficult conversations, I do plan. I keep points so that I stay focused in it, but it's also that I do work through the what if scenarios to empower me of keeping the direction. You are not going to come up with every possible scenario. There's still going to be lots of surprise, so don't worry about having a boring conversation. But at least when we think about the what ifs, we can start to analyze and think about our response. I've also talked before about that this is not about reacting, right? And I think part of taking a proactive approach is to ask ourselves the what ifs, but it's about responding. So it's the ability to be able to respond. And when we play through the scenarios of the what ifs, then we're better prepared with our ability to be able to respond. Some people would take what ifs and go down what's the worst that could happen? And I think that this is okay too, especially if you're starting to ask yourself, like what happens if I just never had the conversation? What if I didn't have the conversation? And be able to go through that chain of thought. So, what if I didn't have the difficult conversation? with my brother. Well, it probably, it would continue to come up. Am I okay with that? Maybe it feels like a dead issue now because there's been some time. But if I never aired that difficult conversation, there could be productive consequences. It might just go away, but very well, there might be other consequences too of our ability to have open communication, our ability to have vulnerable and authentic conversation together. The closeness of our relationship could change. The trust levels in our relationship could change. And so when I start to look at that way, especially with my family relationships, I start to see that not having the conversation really isn't an option if I want to continue to value or have the closeness in my relationship. And as I've said before, difficult conversations are just that. They're difficult for a reason. So some of the what ifs that you guys came up with were a lot about what happens if the person does not react very well. So what if they get angry? What happens if they get upset? What happens if they just slam the door in my face, if they don't want to have this conversation or walk away? So in the sense of what I just said about our ability to be able to respond, is some of it depends on the relationship of what it is. It's very different if my boss slams the door in my face and walks away than opposed to my husband that slams the door in my face and walks away. So I think that it's really important in that to be state and in thinking of our boundaries is I need to know what is my deal breaker, or when is that point that I'm like, enough's enough. So it's important that if somebody gets upset, that you acknowledge and you listen to the feelings that they're displaying. So if it's anger and resentment, I very well may have crossed their boundary. So I need to be able to ask, maybe by saying things, can you help me understand? I think that I'm missing something here. Can you help me understand what's going on? Can you help me understand why you don't want to have this conversation? Because I might be able to get to a different point there. It's even calling it out like it is. So I see that you're getting upset. Tell me what's upsetting you. I see that you're getting angry at me. Help me understand. Or I want to be able to have this conversation with you, but I don't want it to end up with you slamming the door in my face or erupting in anger. How can we have this differently so that we can hear each other out? Sometimes it is about setting the boundary of having a timeout, right? So I don't want people to put themselves in a situation where it becomes abusive, where it becomes a boundary crossing where you compromise yourself. Those are just inappropriate. And in that sense, I would say if it gets out of control, angry, you need to just shut down the conversation. But it very well might be sometimes when there's emotions. I know that my spouse and I can benefit from taking breaks. So if we start going around and around in the same circle, we are able to take a break so that we can both put our emotions in check and be able to come back more solution oriented, more willing to go into it without getting lost in all of the emotion or the heat of the emotion. It's also, chances are, if we're going around and around in the same circle, we've lost focus on what the to be state is. And so having that pause or taking that break would allow me the time to be able to refocus, maybe relook at what my to be state, and asking myself if I'm getting any closer to doing that. Sometimes I feel that I'm able to articulate my emotions really well. What I'm not so strong at, especially if it's a sensitive issue, like some of these difficult conversations are, is being able to filter really fast what my real emotions are. So sometimes I can end up coming across angry because I'm actually hurt. And I would say that anger is a secondary emotion. It's our powerhouse feeling. Anger is usually about control and about feeling powerful in a situation where we feel out of control or pretty powerless. So I know when I'm not being heard, instead of going to my hurt, I go to my anger because it's easier for me to express. It's pretty vulnerable to say to somebody, I'm not feeling like I'm heard, especially if it is one of those closer, intimate relationships. So a break or having pauses And I encourage you all to get really comfortable with uncomfortable pauses, because lots of really great things happen in moments of silence. So it's an opportunity for me to ask myself, what's going on here? What's really going on here? What am I really upset about? Especially if I start hearing the anger come out, because the anger is not going to solve. Anger is not solution oriented. Anger doesn't help connect. It helps drive people apart. So when I start to get angry, I have to ask myself, what's going on here? Now, if the person that I'm having the conversation with, once again, one of those intimate relationships, is getting angry, like I said before, I can ask some questions around helping me understand what the emotion is about, asking about the emotion that I'm observing, or helping them get to the root cause of their frustration. I would say, and I'm going to say this in a very generalist way, which I really don't mean to, because not everybody's the same. I would say that some of my male clients that I work with express frustration or express anger as a source of frustration, either because they don't understand, they don't know how to say what they're thinking, they don't know how to say what they're feeling. And so sometimes if we slow down and we start talking about what that frustration is, or what am I doing that's frustrating you? How can I help you get through this frustration so that we can move on with the conversation? Sometimes has been good assistance for some of the clients that I work with. The what ifs. There was another couple of emails that came through about what happens if it's just a dead issue, and I guess, or that you don't feel that you need to have the conversation anymore, but everybody else feels like you still have to have the conversation. And I guess it's a little more challenging without having the content attached to that email, to that question, for me to really predict what it's all about. But I think what we have talked about is we've talked about the avoidance. And so I would ask yourself, is the conversation really done? Is it over? And you might have some more clarity when we go into know when to quit the conversation. And you'll hear this from me again tonight, is that you only quit when you kind of turned over every stone, right? If this relationship is of value to you at all, and even like, our relationship with our bosses is important, because that's about security, and it's about a sense of belonging, and it's about our job, it's about our financial health, it's about being able to provide basic needs for ourselves. So it's a means to an end. So even if that relationship is a strain, it's still of value and of importance. And so I need to make sure that I've turned over every stone. I've looked at every possible solution, and I've tried to approach this difficult conversation in different ways to be heard. And then, so I would ask myself sincerely, is this conversation over? Have I done all of that? If it's a matter that, you just don't feel that it's necessary, or too much time has passed, I still think that there's a different way of approaching those difficult conversations where a lot of time has gone by, of, being able to go back to the person and say, I've been wanting to talk to you about something. I haven't quite know how to approach it. I want to be able to talk about something that happened quite some time ago, but I think it's important for us to be able to move forward. And I really just want to be able to get this out of the way so that we can have clean slate with one another, or whatever that looks like, to be able to initiate that conversation again. So put it into context. Like, I think that that's okay too. Now, for other people thinking that you need to have this conversation, I think the person that knows best whether I need to have the conversation or not is me, really. And so it's going to start with me having the conversation with myself, getting really honest with myself about whether this conversation needs to happen. And I would say, if there was somebody else saying you need to have this conversation with your brother or your husband or whatever, that's great for them. I just might not be ready. And I might not have arrived there myself. So until I've really gotten there myself, and sometimes, like I said before, it's about the consequences, whether they're positive consequences or negative consequences. Until I really feel the pain to change, I'm not going to change. that's what kind of learner I am. It's also that when we're truly sick and tired of being sick and tired, we'll do something about it. And I think that there's been a number of difficult conversations in my life that out of fear I didn't have, out of pain or avoidance of that pain I didn't have, and it took me a while to get there. I have said in other webinars that I've done that I overstayed in my first marriage. I was married a whole lot longer than I needed to be, but I felt like there was a lot of pressure to stay married, to make things work, to tolerate a level of disconnect. I wanted to make sure that I had turned over every stone, but even after I had turned over every stone and brought every solution, I still overstayed, and it was out of the fear of the pain of change. And so until I got to the point that I was ready to face that pain, I was not prepared to have that conversation. So I think everybody gets there in their own time, but it is about the level of self-honesty that you're willing to have with yourself. And then, so knowing when to quit is what we'll get to next. There is a couple of what if scenarios that were brought to me of, what happens if it goes horribly wrong? There was a couple of difficult conversations about somebody else's health or well-being, and more of an intervention type. What happens if it goes wrong? And I think that the answer to that one is really in your to be state. We've talked about before that most of our difficult conversations are about asking for change. So we're either changing something in the relationship, we're asking them to change, something needs to change, something is not working. So we're trying to be able to navigate and find solutions. And in an intervention type of difficult conversation, really that to be state is where you're getting clear on what your boundaries are and what your deal breakers are. And so if it goes horribly wrong, it's about keeping yourself accountable to what you've laid out as the end game. So I hope that kind of makes sense. I hope that that's answered. If not, we still have a webinar next week. So please continue to reach out to me and make sure that I'm helping you find solutions to your what ifs and to play it out. 9 times out of 10, our what ifs are about fear. And what I know about fear is that it's false evidence appearing real. Most times if I go in with sincere intent, I'm compassionate, I'm understanding, and I've had an empathetic viewpoint, so that I'm open to having the tough conversation. I'm open to exploring the feelings that might come up, and I'm offering empathy for the person that I'm bringing a difficult conversation to. 9 times out of 10, my what ifs have not played out. But like I said before, it's about planning. So the other example that I'll give you is that as an HR manager, in my corporate career, I had a number of difficult conversations that needed to happen about employee performance, including layoffs. So at one point in time, when the first recession had hit Alberta, I was doing layoffs. The organization that I was with needed to have an immediate reduction of $6 million over a 6-week period in salaries. So literally I would get to work and have a very long list of names of people that I was going to have to relieve of their duties. And if any of you have seen George Clooney's movie Up in the Air, that's literally what I experienced for those 6 weeks. And I had to go through the what if scenarios. What if somebody reacts in an angry way? What happens if if somebody cries, somebody's devastated? What happens if somebody becomes depressed or ends up being at risk, right? Were there other considerations? I had to look at each individual and anticipate what reaction would be and what reaction could be, so that I can mitigate risk to the organization that I was working with, but also to myself as somebody that was facilitating that discussion, but ultimately for them. And the one thing that helped me a ton in my HR career when I was having those difficult conversations, it was that if your difficult conversation is about taking something away, right? So I'm taking away control because I'm asking you to change something, or I'm taking away control because I'm telling you that I'm upset with how you're behaving. So even outside of a work context, those are some of the difficult conversations that people are asking me about in their intimate relationships. So if I'm taking something away, it's important that I give something back. And that was great advice when I was an HR manager of, letting somebody, like, I'm taking away your job, so I'm letting you go today, but I'm going to give you a taxi voucher to be able to drive yourself, or to be able to take you home today. I'm going to give you the rest of the day off without pay. Or sometimes it was employment continuance until the end of the month. Or it was employee assistance program support, or transition support for them to be able to find a new job. So as much as I was taking something away, I was trying to be able to give them something back, so that there was control. Or this feeling that they were still in control, and not powerless and devastated. So sometimes that would mitigate such an emotional response. And what I would say is, on the intimate relationship side, it's similar. It could be the same way as you know what, I want to be able to have this difficult conversation, because I think it's standing in the way of us having the ultimate relationship that I really want us to have. That I feel that I've been avoiding this conversation with you, but after all of these years of marriage, I think that you deserve to be able to have me talk to you about this, or, that I really appreciate where we're at, and I feel that I'm comfortable to be able to have this conversation. So there's an appreciation that you can give in that, or positive feedback, right? I think I've told you before that, my spouse is not so good with words sometimes, or articulating his feelings, or sometimes we had talked about taking out the garbage rule. So sometimes I actually have to, let him know very specifically what I need. I need you to come over here and sit next to me on the couch and hold my hand and watch this movie with me instead of being on your iPad, right? Sometimes I have to be that specific. But it's also that to make sure that when I'm giving in that conversation, that I'm recognizing where he does do incredibly well by me, and where he makes me feel incredibly loved and appreciated. That during this high stress of moving and everything else, there has been fresh flowers in my kitchen for 4 weeks. Like, the man has gone above and beyond of making me feel that all of the work, all of the stress, all of the stuff that we're doing around here to prepare ourselves to move, including selling the house and all of this stuff, that it's just the small token of appreciation. So I make sure that I'm offering that as a giving back method. So I hope that helps. Like I said, if you need further clarity, please reach out. Please let me know, and keep bringing your what if situations, or those unique situations that you're still unclear about. Oops. Okay, so difficult conversations at work. So I needed to, these emails were interesting, because there was a lot of people that said, like, the conversation that I have is for work. So I wanted to be able to talk about if you are a manager or a supervisor, about some of those difficult conversations. So I'm just pulling up this. Oops, I messed that up again. Hold on one sec. Sorry, guys. Okay. And I wanted to be able to pull this one up. Okay, so I'm just going to give you the one scenario. because it's, I think managers, supervisors are really tasked with a whole lot of responsibility, right? So these difficult conversations can range everything from people that aren't getting along. So there's conflicts between coworkers. It could be dress code violations. It could be performance problems. Like really, managers are challenged with every single type of employee relations issue out there. But I would say that this is why you get paid the big bucks, right? So, and most people, are drawn to manager or leadership roles because they have an understanding of managing people's performance or have a desire to be able to lead a group of people. And no matter how technical or kind of cookie cutter the work that your employees are doing or that your teams are doing, there is always the human element at work. So people aren't going to get along with one another. People aren't going to follow the rules. Stuff is going to hit the fan in your employees' personal lives, and performance won't always be stellar. So the difficult conversations are going to happen more often than not, I would say. So these are some of the tips and advice that I wanted to be able to share with you from my HR experience of when you're going to approach an employee with a difficult conversation. And so I know, and I have permission from the participant to give you the one example of that there is in the administration services team, there is one employee that other employees have complained about severe body odor. So awkward conversation to have, not very comfortable, but as a manager supervisor, it would be something that not only did you owe to the employee to have, as that I would hope somebody would tell me, I would hope somebody tells me that I have spinach in my teeth. I would hope somebody would tell me if I've got BO issues, but with sensitivity and with some sort of dignity intact, but also that you owe it to your team environment, right? Especially, it would be no different if you had an employee that was allergic to perfumes and, the coworker sitting at the desk next to them was wearing too much perfume or was wearing a strong scent that they were having an allergic reaction to, right? It can be distracting in the work environment. It can lead to disengagement, and it definitely can lead to conflict. So as a manager or supervisor, you would be responsible for having those types of conversation. So, so these are just kind of a couple of techniques that I came up with to help you make an uncomfortable situation slightly less awkward. I wouldn't say that it's totally not awkward at all, because it would be slightly less awkward. So first of all, talk privately. I say, even when it comes to recognition, you should be asking your teams, asking your employees, if that's how they prefer to be recognized, is in a group environment. And I would have that one-to-one private conversation with everybody on my team about being able to even talk about recognition. But definitely when it comes to performance management, definitely when it comes to employment concern or employee relations concerns, you want to make sure that it's private, that it's one-to-one. I would suggest that if it is extremely sensitive, or that you think that there is a violation of your company's code of ethics, or you think that there's an infraction on employment standards, or that's going to put your company at risk for an employee relations or human rights concern, I would make sure that you have an HR representative if your company does. I'm going to go with some small businesses don't. And so if you don't, that you want to make sure that you have either your partner in business, another manager, another supervisor there for support for you and the employee. But I would say if this is the first time that you're addressing employee concern with this particular employee, that you take it upon yourself to have it be private. I would suggest only having another manager or supervisor is if this has been a multiple conversation that you've had. You're going to want to be able to plan your approach. So you want to be able to ask yourself, can you describe exactly what action or behavior is causing the problem? And you're going to want to know that to a T. So in the sense of body odor, for instance, I'm going to use that as an example because that is the awkward one. I would be asking could there be medical reasons, right? So if you took the judgment out of it, could there be medical reasons why? It's also that, we could all go smell blind as well, right? So maybe the employee's not even aware. So if you start asking yourself, can you describe, is it something that's in the employee's control, out of the employee's control? How is the behavior, it could be affecting the employee, but also the team? How might you approach the person? Like I said before, the what ifs are going to come in handy here of anticipating reaction and approach and being sensitive and empathetic to the way that you're going to approach this employee about a body odor situation. So be prepared for those various reactions. And I would also vet very thoroughly, probably with a really good sounding board of either another manager within your organization or with an HR representative about what are the potential consequences of the approach. If you go into the body odor and say you don't bathe, you don't wash your clothes enough, well, guess what? You're going to have issues. You're going to have, you could be accused of creating a hostile work environment, which could turn into an employment standards issue. You could have, and really the employee could say, I was forced to quit my job because I could not work in this environment where everybody's talking about how I don't bathe or whatever. So it really needs to be handled delicately. And I would totally take that scenario and use your peers, not your other subordinates, but your peers or an HR representative as a sounding board. So remain calm, keep your own emotions in check. I tell managers all the time that when you're a manager or a supervisor in an organization, you are the branding for your internal customers, and your internal customers are your employees. So your personal opinion, you don't have one. You represent the organization's opinion, the organization's branding, and so that's how you want to be able to script it out. So even if somebody gets really irate or angry, there is a point of being centered to shut down the conversation. Take a break, some of the other strategies that I gave you in the what if, but never would it be appropriate to respond in anger. Never would it be appropriate to belittle or berate or become abusive to an employee. So keeping a calm, centered demeanor, keeping your emotions in check. I would say to also, with keeping your emotions in check, to keep your body language in check as well, right? You don't want somebody to be offended or disengaged from having this difficult conversation with you because they're picking up nonverbal cues that you're not interested in having it, or you're defensive, or that it's too difficult for you to manage. I would really listen attentively as well. So don't, if you're going to have this conversation, you're going to have a difficult conversation about somebody's performance or a concern that's an employee concern. Don't be like, I would be turning monitors off. I would be turning phones to silent. I'd be putting away cell phones. Really give your employee the respect to have the difficult conversation and your full attention. So making sure that either a receptionist or whoever, I don't know if you have somebody that takes care of your calls or whatever, is able to redirect your calls to voicemail, or, just a do not disturb. I would say the same thing, that if you're able to have closed door meeting in an office, that you're not answering the doors, or that you're notifying somehow that you're unavailable. So I always had two-way glass tint on my doors in my last corporate role, and even at the previous HR manager position before that, I had a do not disturb, so that people knew that I was unavailable to answer the door of my office. And like I said, it's really, when we talk about the empathy of put yourself in that person's shoes, and how you would prefer to be approached, how would you want somebody to tell you? Like I said, if I had spinach in my teeth, I don't want somebody to stand me up when I'm doing, a public speaking engagement to notify me right there and then that I've got this big piece of spinach. I would prefer that they take me to the side, that they're able to, I don't know, maybe it's a discreet hint, something. So I really think that managers and supervisors would benefit from taking some time to reflect, plan approach, use sounding boards, but also think about how empathetic you could be in that. So I hope that that's helped some of the managers and supervisors. And like I said, is sometimes too, it's about reminding yourself that it's not personal. As an HR manager, I worked with incredibly great people. I formed relationships and friendships with people, but at the end of the day, I was hired to make some difficult decisions and to have some difficult conversations. So I would just have to remove the personalness around that, and really treat it as if it was a business decision. And at the end of the day, what I was responsible to do. In my example that I gave to you earlier about having to do layoffs and how awful that was, I know, and this is what I coach managers on now, is that 90% of those people land better. Usually it was the push that they needed to be able to seek a new career, a new role, risk and go back into the work environment to be able to find somewhere where they really fit. But 90% of people land better, and they do much better. And my responsibility and what helped me sleep at night was that I could do it in the most respectful way, while helping them maintain their dignity and showcase, terminations are always difficult, but showcase about that it didn't have to be ugly, that it could be delivered in a sensitive and centered way, and be able to help them transition out of the organization. So by all means, send me emails or ask questions about that. I'm more than willing to share the experience I have. It's also, Kyle Kalu would be a great person to be able to discuss these as well. He's the business and leadership coach with Change My Life Coaching, and Kyle's just got over 25 years of experience of really helping leaders deliver many different types of difficult conversations. Okay, so what happens if you're an employee? In fact, you're the perfect employee. So I received lots of emails about this. So I wanted to be able to give you kind of 3 different scenarios that were brought forward in 3 different emails, and that I have really the same answer for all of them. So the first email talked about that there has been a new CEO established for the company. So fairly new, like within the last 4 or 5 months. That things aren't very clear, that there's been lots of senior management turnover, the company's direction seems unclear, everybody's kind of being micromanaged. It sounds like the new CEO has not established really good trust either, both ways, with employees or with managers, but also the managers and employees don't trust the CEO. Things just take forever to get information back and forth, it sounds like. That he questions the validity of things, sends people to verify it again and again and again, and it just sounds like it's very circular. Sounds like that there's no access to the board of directors, so they don't really have anybody besides themselves to take the issues that they have about the CEO or what it is. So it just sounds like everybody's really unhappy, frustrated, and getting more and more fed up with being treated like children, is the quote I'll take from that. Nobody has a solution other than looking for other jobs. So how do you approach having the difficult conversation with the CEO? The second situation is my boss sent me a text tantrum because we weren't concerned enough when she was sick. So this participant goes on to describe that they have two bosses, both married, which also puts that extra complication in there that your bosses are married to one another. In fact, even in our live workshop, we had a participant too there that reported to two bosses that were in strict partnership, but very polar opposite from one another. It sounds like their boss didn't show up for work one day, but she is frequently absent or back and forth to meetings, and that the boss had sent a text message saying that they were upset with the lack of, or with the insensitivity during their illness. And that basically this participant was told, your lack of empathy for people better change, because I'm sick of death of this kind of behavior from the staff. And that this participant had no idea that they were sick, or that there was any type of seriousness to this illness after finding out that they were in fact way sick. So there's that, but just definitely sounds like there was continuous text messaging of negative outbreaks. So wanting to know how to address that behavior. So then the third one was about work in a creative capacity, producing work that's pretty subjective. My boss has it has bad communication skills. So not only is she unable to articulate her demands clearly, she's also the queen of moving goalposts. So what constitutes good to her can change on a daily basis depending on her mood. It's a recipe for disaster. So the problem is when my work doesn't align with her mental vision, or when she forgets what she instructed me to do last week, she has a reaction to end up ranting and end up doing personal attacks. Like, are you trying to waste my time? What's wrong with you? You put zero effort into this. So how do I redirect my boss's attention back to their commitments or back to work instead of being? So there's a couple of things that with those three scenarios that I'm going to give the exact same advice. So having a difficult conversation with a boss that's difficult is extra difficult, really. It can be taken both ways. I would say that when you go in and you're planning the approach, to get really clear on what the to-be state is, not only what you expect from your manager, from your boss, from the CEO, from any of these people, to be really, really clear. But I think it's also to be really clear on what is your the end of the line for you. Because sometimes bosses aren't going to change. Like I would say, the CEO, and without being able to access somebody above the CEO, I mean, you could have this conversation with the CEO. The CEO might decide, who are you to have this conversation with me? And that's it. Like, that might be it. In fact, all three scenarios could end up playing out that way. And so I think that you need to decide for yourself what you'll tolerate and what you won't tolerate. I think too, and one of the participants that had sent me their scenario had said, I can't lose my job, that financially, and in the industry that they're in, that they're dependent on this job for the financial responsibility of their family. And so I would then ask yourself, if it's not about, are you going to be okay to tolerate the result of whatever that is? Either it's going to go well, you're heard, and your boss considers the change, or there's a win-win solution. Your boss could be deeply offended. It may detrimentally impact your relationship, or nothing will change. And so I would say that if you're looking for grandiose change, you might be disappointed. I think change at that level happens slow. But it's also that if you've got a boss that it just ends up being verbally abusive to you, or attacks you, or won't take ownership, or won't take accountability, doesn't hold the same values as you, or is just so shut down to be able to receive feedback, you might want to consider if that's still something that you're aligned to. It might not mean that you go in and you shove your resignation letter at them. It might mean that you mentally make up your mind that it's time for you to be able to start looking for other organizations that are more aligned with your values and beliefs, or with how you see that employees should be treated. Now, approaching this, it is extra sensitive. I would stick to your I statements, as I feel like, for the instance, with the unclear guidelines, or those ever-changing goalposts. I would stick to the I statement of, I feel frustrated. I get discouraged when I feel that we've had one conversation of what the expectations are, and when the deliverables are due, and then the next minute it is changed. I'd also be prepared to go into all of those situations with solutions. So if the CEO is micromanaging everybody and that it's taking forever to get a decision, come up with a strategy or a plan that you can present as an alternate solution. Is there a middleman that you can delete? Is there certain situations that require approval that could get priority? What does that need to look like? Maybe it's, instead of all of the verbal discussions around when deadlines are, that you can put it all together in an email, and just reconfirm the commitments that were made verbally in the discussion, especially because it sounds like that she's got some bad memory. It's also that if your boss is sending you tantrum texts, I like that. I would say of being able to restate a boundary, right? That it's not appropriate through text message. I would acknowledge your part. So it would be, I'm sorry if I offended you. I had no idea that you were ill. It was not my intent to make you feel that you were dismissed. Of course, had I understood that you were away from the office ill, that you would have extended some sort of offering or recognition of their absence, but that, be it the extra trips back and forth out of the office, or the absence in the office, led you to believe nothing was wrong. So I would just look at different ways of communicating, right? If so, to be able to pick up the phone to have the conversation, or have it in person. Or maybe if your boss is going to be absent, that she sends an email at the beginning of the day so that everybody is aware of, I'm not in the office today because I'm out ill. Or that's kind of how at Change My Life Coaching we communicate, is that access to an overall calendar, so we know kind of where people are at. But if I'm not going to be at the office at all, that I just send an email at the beginning of the morning to let them know the best way to be able to contact me. So those are kind of my precautionaries to you. But at the end of the day, and I said this last week, I believe, my boss isn't responsible for my happiness at work. The responsibility lies on me. And so I either take a risk and have the difficult conversation and have it not go well, but then at least know clearly where I stand and can make the best informed decision for myself about my commitment to the organization. The other last piece of advice that I'd offer for employees is I would say that I wouldn't extend your loyalty to compromising your own values, right? Because at the end of the day, if the organization needs to be able to eliminate your position, or separate ways in any ways, it's going to be about a business decision. And so it should be the same thing hard not to take it personally when your boss can't conduct themselves in an appropriate manner. But at the end of the day, it's got to be about a business decision for yourself and about where you continue to keep company. And I would say that the same thing when it comes to even personal relationships, right? As if I'm responsible for teaching people how to treat me, if I'm responsible for stating those boundaries, and then when the boundaries get crossed again, I'm responsible to make good choices for myself, even if that other person can't consider that. And so this is kind of our last thought of today in the last couple of minutes, is knowing when to quit. So when we go from coworker to cohort, peer, friend, manager, like I said before, you want to make sure that you've turned over every stone. So we don't quit unless we've come up with every solution. We've tried to be able to present. We've gone back to try with compassion of, I feel like I'm missing something here. Things just are not getting better. Is there something else that we can do? Can you help me understand? So after I've turned over every stone, that I'm able to know that I've done my part to be able to move on. Okay, so to say with compassion. And I would say that you don't quit unless you've completely understood their point of view. And sometimes it is about agreeing to disagree. Sometimes it is like in the realm of things, especially larger organizations, we're going to work for a lot of difficult people. We're going to work with difficult people. And it's about it. I think it's about knowing that you're not going to get along with everybody, that you're not going to be best friends with everybody. There are going to be some people that it strictly is, it's going to be very business oriented. It's going to be very, very formal, or it's going to be more on an acquaintance level, and that it just will not have the level of intimacy that you might have with some of your other relationships. But when you feel that you have completely understood their point of view, but there's just no budging, there's no change, and it continues to progress into this conflict, that maybe that's the time to quit. The big thing that I want to say for families, though, is you can quit a spouse, you can quit a boyfriend, a girlfriend, a partner, you can quit a business, you can quit friends, you can change friends, everything else. But the one thing that you cannot do is you cannot quit children. So I can say as a parent that sometimes it's tempting. So especially somewhere between the ages of 15 and going on, but you can't quit on them. So our responsibility as parents and the role that we signed up for is that we have to continue to invite to have the conversation. There is a lot of things, really bless my mom, because my mom is probably the most patient and kind and loving woman I have ever met. But I put my parents through the ringer. There were things that my mom and dad had to have difficult conversations with that I'm pretty sure that no parent wants to have with their children. But then not only did they have to have them once, they had to have them time and time and time again. There was conversations that my mom was having with me when I was 15 that I really did not hear until I was 25. It was like all of a sudden I got my brains back and I could hear my mom and I could hear the wisdom of her advice without having this adolescent rebellion in me to do the polar opposite of everything she was telling me to do. So, but so grateful that my mom continued to invite me to have the conversation, that my mom really taught me about what unconditional love was. My mom would always say that, if there was disappointment involved, that it wasn't disappointment in me as a person, that it was disappointment in my choices or my actions. But that she would continue to invite me, sometimes through gritted teeth, I'm pretty sure, but that she would continue to invite me to the conversation. So we cannot quit on children. life experience teaches us many things about who we are, and sometimes pain has always been my touchstone to spiritual growth. So sometimes I've had to go through a few more painful things before I could really hear what I needed to hear in some of those difficult conversations. Just like sometimes it had to get a little more painful for me to have the motivation to go and have those difficult conversations myself. So that's what I would say about that. So short week this week, only because it's Tuesday. So I wanted you to keep bringing unique situations forward. We've got one session left. I'm going to talk about in the Q&A on Thursday. Like I said, it'll probably be later in the afternoon. Than it usually is, but we're going to continue to talk about when to know when you need to quit the conversations, when it's just time to move forward and move on from them. So I'll spend some more time talking about that in the Q&A, but until then, please, you need more clarity on your what ifs, keep bringing them forward. But if you've got those unique situations out there, I really want you to continue to bring them forward too. So those of you that emailed me, I will touch base with you, just kind of with a recap, but also you'll have tonight's recording as well available for you tomorrow by 5 p.m. Are there any questions with anybody that's on here tonight that I can answer in the last 60 seconds that we have of our webinar? No, you're all good? Okay. Good. So keep reflecting, keep fine-tuning, and keep bringing things forward that you need your questions to or answered for. So have yourself a great night, and we'll see you all on Facebook on Thursday. Have a good one, everybody.